Good morning, 7th grade grammar and writing students. And as we begin this lesson today, I'm sure you realize we only have 5 days of school left, so a couple more Mondays and a couple of Wednesdays. I have we've already started the adverb chapter, and this week we are moving into adverb clauses. But before we begin to talk about the adverb clause, I want to review a little bit about what a clause is. So if you remember, a while back we talked about clauses and their difference from a phrase. A clause is something that has a subject and a verb, and a phrase does not. A phrase might have a noun in it, it might have an action word in it, but it doesn't have the subject and verb skeleton that you need for diagramming. Now, we also talked about 2 different kinds of clauses. And if you remember, we talked about dependent clauses and independent clauses. A dependent clause must have something joined to it in order to make a complete thought. Now, when I taught this to you earlier in the year, we talked about how dependent clauses were a lot like you guys. Most of you are 12 or 13 and not independent at this stage of the game. So you need to rely on your parents. You need money from them, food from them, a house from them. And so you are dependent. The same thing with a clause. It might have a subject and a verb, but it really can't stand alone. And that's usually because of an introductory word that it won't allow it to stand alone. An independent clause, though, may stand alone. It could be a complete sentence. So keep those in mind as we move on to talk about adverb clauses. So we're going to go down here and we're going to talk about what kind of clause you're going to find as an adverb clause. And that is going to be a dependent clause. It's going to modify a verb, an adjective, or an adverb, and it's going to begin with a subordinating conjunction. You will find this information on page 391, and the gray box is where I have taken this definition from. So based on the information that I've provided, that a clause is going to have a subject and a noun in it, but it has to be dependent. It can't stand alone. And therefore, when it is diagrammed, it's going to not be on the main line, but a lower line, below the main line. Now, our adverb clause can answer some certain questions. It can answer how, when, where, why, how long, how much, to what degree, in spite of what, and under what condition. So these are the questions that you need to ask. So you can't just assume that you know for sure that this is an adverb clause and not perhaps an adjective. And you need to check these questions. These questions are also found in your gray box. The final thing, it does point out that an adverb clause can be positioned at any point in the sentence. And an adverb clause is diagrammed on a horizontal line below the main line. So we will be looking at some of those in just a minute. And so I just pointed this out. An adverb clause is diagrammed on a horizontal line, so that means it's a straight line. It's going to come underneath the main clause. It's going to have a broken line that connects the verb of the defendant clause to the modified word in the main clause. And I do have a few examples coming up. So be really careful. Dotted line is what is going to run between the two. Very similar to the who, which clause, but the who, which clause is, I'm going to say most of the time, 99% of the time, an adjective clause that is describing. So the boy who danced delightfully was in the play. And so that who is running from boy. With an adverb clause, though, it is not going to run from a noun. It's not going to modify a noun. it's going to connect the verb, and the dependent clause to the modified word in the main clause. So we'll take a look at those in just a second. But for right now, I want to talk about subordinating conjunctions. Subordinating conjunctions are, let me try to see if I can move this over. There we go. Subordinating conjunctions are connecting words that are going to come between your main clause and the dependent clause. So here's a whole list of them, and guess what? They are in your book on page 392. So I would suggest that you either print out this particular page, put it in your notebook, or you keep page 392 open while you complete your work. A subordinating conjunction is a connecting word, and you've seen these, you've used these before. Just a few examples. I've put the whole list here. After, as though, how, if, since. The clausal words that you see in your IEW writing, a lot of them are showing up here. And so those clauses are often dependent clauses. The who, which clauses, those are the adjective dependents. The clausal in IEW writing are these, and a lot of those words you should recognize: because, and if, since, where, when, while. All of those are the clausal words that create your clauses in your writing. But when we use one of these, it immediately can't stand by itself. So if we take a look at the first one of the examples at the very top of 392 above your subordinating conjunctions, there's an example. We have our family worship before we eat breakfast. Before we eat breakfast has a subject, which is we, eat is the verb. But we've put that before in front of it. It now can't stand alone. It has to connect with something else. Look down to the middle of the page. I will praise thee with uprightness of heart when I shall have learned the righteous judgments. When we put the word when in there, it completely throws it into the dependent clause status. So you should be just as familiar with working with these subordinating conjunctions as you are with the who, which, because this is the clausal dress up in your writing. So be familiar with these. Hold on to this list as you do your homework. Now I wanted to show you how these are diagrammed, and I found a nice one online that actually shows exactly where the subordinating conjunction is going to go. And again, I'm going to say 99.9% of the time. There's occasionally times where it might not because of the English language, so don't pin me down. So here we have the subject and verb from the main clause in the sentence that we just looked at. I will praise thee with uprightness of heart. The subject would be I, and the verb would be will praise. The subordinating conjunction would be the word when. That's going to go right here. And then down here, the rest of that clause is when I shall have learned thy righteous judgments. I, and then in the verb space, shall have learned. Now, we would also have to add on direct objects. We would have to add a direct object down here. We have a prepositional phrase we probably have to put in there. Over here's an example. My mom smiled when I made dinner. So the possessive pronoun, mom, subject, smile, verb. Here's your subordinating conjunction. Keep going back to this example. And then the dependent clause, I made dinner. So just remember that, and I love this example because if you just keep it in front of you, you know where to put your subordinating conjunction. Here's another one. I read because I love stories. So subordinating conjunctions are going to go on the dotted line. So let's go back up there. I want you to make sure that you have these in front of you as you are working. Make sure that you know how to use those. And there are examples in your book. And again, you see those subordinating conjunctions popping up on that dotted line. So let's do a couple of the class practice. Turn to page 394. And we are not going to answer the questions that it asks. Instead, what we want to do is look at B, where it says read each adverb clause and tell what word it modifies. So we want to find the clauses. So hopefully in 1 you'll be able to find that. Because he knew their unbelief, Jesus did not confide in the people. So take a minute and figure out what the dependent clause is. And if you said because he knew their unbelief, you are right. And remember, our adverb clauses are going to modify not a noun. So don't say that it modifies Jesus. It's going to modify a verb, an adverb, or an adjective. So you got to pick another word. And in this case, it's going to be did confide. Remember, we don't use the not word. Not is an adverb. In the people is a prepositional phrase. It's not going to modify anything in there. Let's look at the second one. Such miracles have not been seen since the world began. So again, what is our dependent clause? Well, if you're looking at your subordinating conjunctions, you would have figured out since the world began is the dependent clause. Again, what does it modify? It's not going to modify miracles. And so we have to kick that out right away. And all you're left with really is have not been seen. So you're left with the verb. And you would just say have been seen. That's what it's modifying. Let's do one more. Although they saw his miracles, many people still rejected the Messiah. So again, if we're looking at the subordinating conjunction list, we would see although in there. And although they saw his miracles is indeed the clause. It's dependent, can't stand by itself. Now we have to figure out what does it modify. It can't modify a noun, so don't look for the noun. It can't be people. It can't be Messiah. So we have to look probably at the verb, and that would be the correct answer, rejected. So a lot of times if you're going to have to make a guess, go for the verb. Because adverbs like to hang out with verbs. Don't put a noun as at what it modifies. You will be doing some diagramming. I believe I assigned some diagramming for this. And so practice with that. I have this week put your assignments up on Dropbox. I'm trying to be consistent in that so you can put them up on the Sycamore site, or you can just have your mom send them to me or acknowledge that you did them. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you again for the next lesson.